The most famous fact about the Titanic isn't that it sank, it's that it had lifeboats for barely half the people on board. More than a century later, that fact still echoes in a strange way. People walk past a cruise ship in port, glance up at the row of orange pods clinging to the side, and quietly count them. Something in the back of the mind whispers that the math still doesn't quite add up, that maybe, after all this time, the industry is still pulling the same trick. The answer everyone reaches for is the obvious one: greed, cost-cutting, corporate indifference. A company shaving a few thousand off a ship to push a few more dollars into a quarterly report. It's a satisfying answer because it makes sense of a tragedy. Someone must have been cheap. Someone must have decided a certain percentage of human beings were an acceptable rounding error. It's also the wrong answer. It was wrong in 1912, and it's wrong now. Start with the money, because the money is the easiest myth to kill. The Titanic cost about $7.5 million to build, an astronomical figure for its era. Adding the full set of extra lifeboats that would have saved everyone on board would have cost roughly $16,000 more. That isn't a rounding error. That's not even a footnote. The davits along the boat deck, the cranes that lower the boats, were designed to hold up to 48 lifeboats if needed. The space was there, the hardware was there, the money was a non-issue. The ship simply wasn't equipped with what it could have easily carried. Then comes the part that genuinely unsettles people the first time they hear it. The Titanic wasn't breaking the law, it was over-complying with it. The Board of Trade required 16 lifeboats. White Star Line added 4 collapsibles to make 20. The ship sailed with more survival craft than the regulations demanded. The shortage that killed 1,500 people wasn't a violation, it was compliance. Which raises a far more disturbing question. What kind of regulation lets a 46,000-ton ship carry boats for half its passengers and calls that legal? And if the rules looked like that then, how confident should anyone really be that the rules look correct now? To understand the modern ship, you have to understand the assumption buried inside the old one. The lifeboat isn't really an object. It's a frozen idea about what an emergency at sea is supposed to look like. And the idea frozen into the Titanic was very specifically wrong. Go back to the British Merchant Shipping Act of 1894. It contains a table. The table lists the minimum number of lifeboats a ship needs based on its gross tonnage. It climbs neatly from small vessels up to 10,000 tons. At 10,000 tons, the table simply stops. Above that line, the rule reads 10,000 tons and upwards, and the required number of boats freezes at 16. Forever, no matter how big the ship gets. When that table was written, the largest passenger liner afloat displaced about 8,000 tons. The cap looked generous. By 1912, the Titanic weighed nearly 5 times the threshold. The table never moved. It never needed to, in the eyes of the regulator, because of one quiet conviction nobody in the public conversation today seems to remember. The Board of Trade did not believe that lifeboats were arks. It believed they were ferries. The whole point of a lifeboat in 1912 wasn't to keep you alive in the open ocean for days. The North Atlantic was the busiest shipping lane in the world. The expectation was that a wounded ship would stay afloat long enough for another ship to arrive. People would climb into a lifeboat, row to the rescue vessel, climb out, and get on with their lives. The lifeboat was a shuttle, a short-haul vehicle, a bridge between a damaged ship and a healthy one. In that worldview, you don't need lifeboats for everyone simultaneously. You need enough to start the relay. The boats come back, the rescue ship is there, the water is calm enough, the night is short enough, the radio works. Everything that needed to be true on the night of April 14, 1912 was, in fact, not true. How normal this was at the time is striking. Of the 39 British ocean liners over 10,000 tons in 1912, 33 didn't have lifeboats for everyone on board. Titanic wasn't an outlier, it was the rule. The shortage wasn't engineered into one ship by one company. It was engineered into the entire category of problem the industry believed it was solving. And once you see that, the deeper constraint becomes visible. The constraint that mattered most that night wasn't the count of boats. It was time. Only 18 of Titanic's 20 boats got away. Many launched half-empty because passengers refused to step into a small wooden boat hanging 70 feet above black water, and crews had never been drilled on how to load them under load. Even if the ship had carried lifeboats for everyone, the question of whether anyone could have launched them all in 2.5 hours, in the dark, on a tilting deck, with a crew that had never practiced, that question has no comfortable answer. The world's response was SOLAS, the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea. The first version was signed in 1914. less than 2 years after the disaster. The headline rule, the one everyone remembers and the one that supposedly closed the book. Lifeboats for everyone on board. Problem solved. Move on. Except not really, because that simple sentence hides a math problem nobody talks about. Modern solace requires survival craft for 125% of every person on the ship. Generous, comforting, read the fine print. That 125% is split. At least 37.5% of total capacity must be in lifeboats on each side of the ship. So roughly 75% of the people on board can fit into lifeboats only if you can use both sides at once. The remaining capacity comes from inflatable life rafts, often deployed through chutes. Add the boats on one side, the boats on the other side, and the rafts, and you get the magic 125%. Notice what the math is admitting. The lifeboat system is designed from the start with the assumption that one entire side of the ship might become unusable. That isn't a paranoid worst case. That's the baseline. The reason is physics. Lifeboats are rated to launch with the ship, listing up to 20 degrees. Past 20, the geometry breaks. The boats on the high side swing inward and grind against the hull as they try to drop. The boats on the low side hit the rising water before they can swing clear. In a serious list, half of your survival craft becomes ornamental. The redundancy isn't there because somebody is being paranoid. It's there because every naval architect knows what happens when a ship starts to lean. This is also why mega ships look short on lifeboats to the human eye. The old Solus Code limited any single lifeboat to 150 people. Then Oasis of the Seas arrived in 2009, carrying around 6,700. To cover that crowd with old-style lifeboats, the ship would have needed nearly 40 of them, eating up most of the length of the hull. Instead, the rules were rewritten, and a new generation of lifeboat appeared. The Shat-Harding CRW-55 can hold up to 370 people, fully enclosed, fire-resistant, self-righting, engine, provisions, radio. Oasis carries 18 of these, and that covers nearly everyone on board. The pods look small because they're hanging from the side of what is functionally a small floating city. The math works. The eye refuses to believe it. And then, just as the modern story starts to feel like a clean engineering triumph, Costa Concordia happens. January 13, 2012. 26 lifeboats, 69 life rafts, SOLAS compliant, 125% capacity, the kind of vessel that, on paper, had solved the Titanic problem. The captain steered too close to the Tuscan island of Giglio. The hull tore open on a rock. Within an hour, the list had passed the 20 degrees. 3 lifeboats couldn't launch at all. Most of the 69 life rafts never made it into the water. An evacuation the International Maritime Organization expects to take 60 to 80 minutes took more than 6 hours. 32 people died. Costa Concordia wasn't a failure of lifeboat regulation. It was the regulation working exactly as written. The math had admitted from the start that half the boats might be unusable. The list went past 20 degrees. The math turned out to be right, which is why the industry's response wasn't what most people would have predicted. The cruise industry didn't decide it needed more lifeboats. It decided it needed fewer reasons to ever use them. The SOLAS amendments that took effect on July 1, 2010 introduced a regulation called Safe Return to Port. It applies to new passenger ships over 120 meters or with 3 or more main vertical fire zones, which means essentially every modern cruise ship. The founding line of the regulation is plain. The ship is its own best lifeboat. In practice, that line becomes a list of requirements that has reshaped how cruise ships are designed at the steel level. 2 engine rooms separated, 2 switchboards in different fire zones, duplicate cabling routed through different parts of the hull so a single fire can't kill both runs, redundant bilge pumps, redundant communications, redundant propulsion. The ship is required to survive a defined fire in one main fire zone or the flooding of one watertight compartment, and still steam back to port at around 6 knots under its own power, with the lights on and the toilets working until the passengers can simply walk off onto a pier instead of jumping into a lifeboat in heavy seas. That is the actual safety system on a modern passenger ship, not the orange pods, the duplicate engine, the second switchboard, the pump nobody on board will ever see. The redundancy hidden inside the hull is doing the work the lifeboat used to be asked to do. This is the reversal that almost no public conversation about cruise safety has caught up with. The modern industry didn't solve the lifeboat shortage by adding more lifeboats. It solved it by demoting the lifeboat. Step back and the trade-off stack becomes visible. Lifeboats are heavy and they hang high on the hull. Stack more of them on a ship and you raise its center of gravity, which makes the ship more more prone to the very list angle that disables lifeboats in the first place. Every meter of deck given to a lifeboat is a meter that isn't a balcony, a pool deck, a promenade, a cabin. The industry already compresses lifeboats into the fewest, largest pods engineering will permit because the alternative is a ship lined end-to-end with hanging boats and almost no view. Adding more boats also doesn't help if you can't launch them in time, on a tilting deck, in a storm, with a crew you trained for an hour at the start of the cruise. And every dollar spent on another lifeboat is a dollar not spent on the redundant pump that might keep the ship from ever needing one. That's why the most important lifeboat on a modern passenger ship isn't a lifeboat at all. It's the second engine room. It's the duplicate cable run buried inside a different fire zone. It's the bilge pump nobody on board will ever look at. The visible orange pods aren't the safety system. They're what's left after every other layer of the safety system has already failed. Which brings the whole story back to the night of April 14, 1912. The boats hanging from Titanic's davits weren't insufficient because someone was cheap. They were insufficient because the industry believed in a kind of emergency that didn't match what was actually about to happen. It believed in a ferry problem when it was about to face an arc problem. It believed in rescue ships nearby when the closest one was hours away. It believed in calm water and a slow sinking and a long night. The lifeboats weren't the failure, the assumptions were the failure. The lifeboats were just the visible part of a worldview that turned out to be wrong. A century later, the industry has finally stopped trying to win that old argument. It stopped insisting the lifeboat is the answer. It rebuilt the ship around the admission that the lifeboat is the worst-case fallback in a stack of overlapping safer ones. So when someone glances up at a cruise ship in port and counts the orange pods and feels that quiet doubt, they're asking a Titanic question about a post-Titanic ship. They're looking at the wrong layer. The safety system isn't the pods. It's the hull, the redundancy, the regulations, the duplicated machinery that lets the ship limp home instead of dying at sea. The pods are just what's still visible from the outside. The real arc is everywhere else. Titanic didn't change because we added more lifeboats. It changed because we finally stopped pretending the lifeboat was the point. I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something new about one of the most fascinating engineering marvels ever built by mankind. If you want more content like this, please subscribe and hit that like button. I'm Larry, and this is the Ship Files. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.